Chapter 1: Falling Petals. The morning fog clung to the hills of Palo Alto like a whispered secret, soft and gray against the California sky. Elena Morales pulled her father's worn gardening gloves over her small hands and stepped out of the maintenance shed behind the Blackwood estate. At 28, she had the quiet grace of someone who understood that life moved in seasons, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle, but always changing. Her father, Miguel, had been the groundskeeper here for 15 years, tending to the manicured lawns and pristine hedges that surrounded the glass and steel mansion. Elena helped him on weekends, saving every dollar toward her dream of studying landscape design. But dreams, she had learned, were extensive things for people like her. She was trimming the rose bushes near the property's eastern edge when she noticed it. A gap in the tall cypress hedge she had never seen before. The morning light filtered through, revealing glimpses of something extraordinary beyond. Elena glanced back toward the house. Her father was busy with the fountain on the other side of the grounds. Curiosity pulled her forward. She slipped through the gap and gasped. Hidden behind the formal gardens lay a secret world, a small enclosed space where nature had been allowed to run wild and beautiful. Ancient oak trees formed a canopy overhead, their branches heavy with Spanish moss. Below, a symphony of flowers bloomed in impossible colors, deep purple salvias that seemed to glow in the filtered light, white gardenias with petals like silk, and climbing roses in shades of coral and champagne that she had never seen before. At the center of it all stood a weathered stone bench, carved with intricate patterns that spoke of hands long gone. The air was thick with perfume and the soft hum of bees moving lazily from bloom to bloom. Elena sank onto the bench, overwhelmed. In this hidden place, the weight of her small apartment, her father's aching back, her mother's worried glances at unpaid bills, all of it seemed to lift away. Here, surrounded by such beauty, she could imagine herself as someone else, someone who belonged in a world of possibility. She reached out to touch a climbing rose, its petals soft as a whisper against her fingertips. The flower was perfect, untouched by the harsh realities that shaped her daily life. For the first time in months, Elena allowed herself to dream beyond the boundaries of her circumstances. The sun climbed higher, and she knew she had to return to work. But as she stood to leave, she made a silent promise to the garden. She would come back. This place would be her secret, her refuge from a world that often felt too small for the dreams growing in her heart. Elena slipped back through the hedge, but something had changed inside her. The ordinary world looked different now, touched by the magic she had discovered just beyond reach. She picked up her pruning shears and returned to the roses, but her mind remained in the secret garden, already counting the hours until she could return. The fog had lifted completely by the time she finished her morning tasks, but Elena carried the softness with her, wrapped around her heart like a promise of something beautiful yet to come. Chapter 2: Strange Eyes. 3 days passed before Elena could return to the secret garden. Her regular job at the local nursery and evening community college classes kept her busy, but the hidden space called to her during quiet moments. She found herself thinking about the unusual roses, wondering about their varieties, imagining how she might care for them better. Thursday morning arrived gray and cool, perfect for working outdoors. Her father had left early for a job across town, leaving Elena to maintain the Blackwood property alone. She completed her assigned tasks quickly, her anticipation growing with each pruned branch and swept pathway. Finally, she slipped through the gap in the hedge. The garden seemed even more magical in the softer light. Dewdrops clung to spiderwebs stretched between branches, creating tiny prisms that scattered rainbow fragments across the flowers. Elena settled onto the stone bench and pulled out a small notebook where she had begun sketching garden designs, dreams on paper that cost nothing but hope. She was deep in concentration, drawing the way the climbing roses cascaded over an old trellis, when a shadow fell across her page. "You're not supposed to be here." Elena's heart stopped. She looked up to find a man standing at the garden's entrance, backlit by the morning sun so that she couldn't make out his features clearly. Tall, with dark hair, and an expensive-looking jacket that didn't belong in a garden setting. "I'm sorry," she whispered, closing her notebook and standing quickly. "I work for my father, Miguel Morales. He's your groundskeeper. I was just drawing." The man stepped closer, and Elena could see his face now. Younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, with intelligent gray eyes and the kind of pale complexion that spoke of too many hours spent indoors. His expression wasn't angry exactly, but cautious, measuring. "You were drawing my garden." "Your garden?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. This had to be David Blackwood, the son. She had seen him from a distance a few times over the years, usually getting in or out of expensive cars, always in a hurry. He looked different up close, less polished, more human. "Well, technically, my grandmother's garden. She designed it 50 years ago and made me promise to keep it wild." He gestured toward the bench. "She used to sit right there, sketching flowers just like you were doing." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I should go. I didn't mean to intrude. It's just so beautiful here, and I've been studying landscape design, and I've never seen roses like these before, and—" She was babbling. She forced herself to stop. David studied her for a long moment. "What kind of roses?" "Excuse me?" "You said you'd never seen roses like these. What makes them special?" Elena blinked, surprised by the question. She glanced at the coral roses, then back at his face. He seemed genuinely interested. "The coral ones are probably Lady of Shalott, but they're climbing much higher than they should. And those champagne-colored ones might be Buff Beauty, but the petals are different, more delicate. Your grandmother must have been an incredible gardener to coax such unusual growth from them." Something shifted in his expression. "You really do know about plants." "It's what I want to do with my life," Elena said simply. "Design spaces like this, places where people can find peace." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the garden, bees humming, leaves rustling, water dripping from somewhere hidden among the plants. Elena became acutely aware of the contrast between them. His expensive clothes and confident posture, her worn jeans and calloused hands. Two people from different worlds, meeting in a place that seemed to belong to neither. "I come here when I need to think," David said finally. "Running a company, dealing with board meetings and investment presentations, sometimes I forget there's anything real left in the world." "What kind of company?" Elena asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. It sounded nosy. "Green technology, solar panel efficiency mostly, trying to save the world one roof at a time." He smiled, and it transformed his face completely. Not very exciting compared to creating something like this. "I think saving the world sounds pretty exciting," Elena said, then felt foolish for the earnestness in her voice. David looked at her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. "What's your name?" "Elena. Elena Morales. I'm David." He paused. "Would you like to see the rest of the garden? There are parts even the groundskeepers don't know about." Elena knew she should say no. She should apologize again and leave, return to the safe boundaries of her assigned tasks. But something in his voice, a loneliness that matched her own, made her nod. "Just for a few minutes," she said. David smiled again, and Elena felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed. Chapter 3. Sweet Afternoons. The following weeks fell into a pattern as natural as breathing. Elena would complete her morning tasks around a Blackwood property, then slip into the secret garden where David would be waiting with coffee and a thermos and questions about the flowers. He had started bringing gardening books from his grandmother's collection, their pages yellow with age and filled with pressed flowers from decades past. "She wrote notes in the margins," David said one Thursday afternoon, showing Elena a page about hybrid tea roses. In spidery handwriting, someone had written, "Planted 3 Mr. Lincoln bushes by the oak tree. They bloom best with morning sun and afternoon shade. Like people, roses need both light and protection." Elena traced the faded ink with her fingertip. "She sounds wise." "She was the only person who ever really understood me," David said quietly. "My parents wanted me to be a lawyer or go into finance. Grandmother encouraged my interest in environmental science. She said the world needed people who cared about growing things, not just making money." They were sitting on the stone bench, the notebook between them filled with Elena's sketches of garden improvements. Over the past 3 weeks, she had drawn plans for expanding the herb section, creating a small pond for reflection, and building raised beds for vegetables. David listened to her ideas with the intensity of someone starving for genuine conversation. "Tell me about your family," he said, closing the book and setting it aside. Elena hesitated. Their friendship existed in this hidden space, separate from the realities of their different worlds. Talking about her family felt like bringing those harsh realities into their sanctuary. "My parents came here from Mexico when I was 5. They wanted better opportunities for me and my sister. Papa works hard, too hard sometimes. His back hurts from years of physical labor, but he never complains. Mama cleans houses and takes care of the neighbors' children. They sacrifice everything so I can go to school." "That's why you work so hard," David said, not a question, but an understanding. "Sometimes I feel guilty for wanting more. They're happy with simple things, family dinners, my sister's good grades, knowing the rent is paid. But I dream about designing public spaces, creating gardens where families like mine can find beauty, even if they can't afford to own it." David was quiet for a moment, watching a butterfly dance among the salvias. "I've never had to worry about money," he said, "but I think about purpose all the time. Whether the work I'm doing actually matters. Whether I'm living up to my grandmother's faith in me." "Your solar panel company helps families save money on electricity bills," Elena pointed out. "That matters to people like my parents." "I suppose." David turned to look at her. "But sitting here with you, talking about creating something beautiful and lasting, this feels more important than any board meeting I've ever attended." The late afternoon sun slanted through the oak leaves, doppling their faces with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Elena was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how David's eyes seemed to hold depths she wanted to explore. The air between them felt charged with possibility. "Elena," David said. I looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. In his gray eyes, I saw not the wealthy heir to a tech fortune, but someone who understood what it meant to feel trapped by other people's expectations. The moment stretched between them, delicate as a soap bubble. Then Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "Finishing early today. Meet me at the truck in 20 minutes." Reality crashed back in. Elena stood quickly, gathering her notebook and pencil. "I have to go." "Of course," David stood to, but made no move to leave. "Same time tomorrow?" Elena knew she should say no. Whatever was growing between them was dangerous, complicated by the vast differences in their circumstances. But the thought of not returning to this place, to these conversations that fed something hungry in her soul felt impossible. "Same time tomorrow," she agreed. As she slipped through the hedge, Elena carried with her the memory of David's eyes and the growing certainty that she was falling toward something that could either lift her up or break her heart completely. The garden had become more than a refuge. It had become the place where she was learning what it meant to hope for something beyond her reach. But for now, that hope felt worth the risk. Chapter 4: Family Storms. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning in November, when the California air had turned crisp and the secret garden blazed with autumn colors. Elena arrived at the Blackwood estate to find her father waiting by the maintenance shed, his face grave in the early morning light. "Mija," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Elena's stomach dropped. Miguel Morales was a man of few words, but when he spoke with that particular tone, it meant trouble. She followed him into the shed, where he turned to face her with worried eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood came to see me yesterday. She knows about you and her son." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "Papa, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." Miguel's voice was gentle but firm. "I've watched you these past weeks. You come home with light in your eyes, humming songs you never hummed before. I'm not blind, Elena, but neither is she." Elena sank onto an overturned crate, her hands trembling. "What did she say?" "That you're a distraction her son can't afford right now. That there are important business decisions being made and David needs to focus on his responsibilities." Miguel sat down across from her. "She offered to pay for your schooling if you stop seeing him." The offer hung in the air between them like a poisonous flower. Elena felt anger and shame war in her chest. "Like I'm something to be bought." "She sees you as a threat," Miguel said. "In her world, people like us are meant to stay invisible. We tend their gardens and clean their houses, but we don't fall in love with their children." "Love?" Elena whispered. Her father's expression softened. "Mija, you think I don't recognize the look? I felt the same way about your mother when we were young. The difference is we came from the same world." Before Elena could respond, the shed door opened. Victoria Blackwood stood in the doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Elena's family made in 6 months. "Ms. Morales," she said coolly, "I hoped we could have a conversation." Elena stood, feeling every inch of height difference between them. Victoria Blackwood was tall and elegant, with the kind of confidence that came from generations of privilege. She had seen her from a distance over the years, but up close, the woman's presence was intimidating. "Mrs. Blackwood," Elena managed, "I think you know why I'm here." Victoria's voice was crisp, businesslike. "My son has been spending a great deal of time in his grandmother's garden lately, with you." Miguel stepped protectively closer to Elena. "My daughter has done nothing wrong." "I'm not suggesting she has," Victoria replied. "But David is at a crucial point in his career. We have investors interested in taking his company public, potential partnerships that could make him one of the most influential voices in renewable energy. He can't afford distractions right now." "I'm not a distraction," Elena said quietly. "I care about David. I support his work." Victoria's smile was sharp as winter frost. "I'm sure you believe that. But caring isn't enough in the world my son inhabits. He needs someone who understands the social and business complexities of his position, someone who can be an asset to his career, not a liability." The words cut deep because Elena knew there was truth in them. She had seen how David's face changed when he talked about board meetings and investor expectations. She knew the pressure he was under, the weight of family legacy and financial responsibility. "What exactly are you asking me to do? Stop seeing him? Let him focus on building the future he's worked so hard for?" She paused. "In return, I'll fund your education. Full scholarship to any landscape architecture program you choose. You'll have the career you've dreamed of." Elena felt her father's sharp intake of breath beside her. The offer was generous, more than generous. It was life-changing. "And if I refuse?" Elena asked. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "Then you'll be responsible for derailing a young man's promising future. David is impressionable right now, vulnerable to romantic notions that could cost him everything." The manipulation was subtle but clear. Elena could have what she wanted: education, career, financial security, but only if she gave up the person who had come to mean everything to her. The choice felt like being asked to cut out her own heart. "I need time to think," Elena said. "Of course." She reached into her purse and pulled out an elegant business card. "Call me when you've decided. But don't take too long. David has a board meeting next week where crucial decisions will be made. He needs to be fully present for that." After she left, Elena and her father sat in silence for a long time. The morning sun streamed through the shed windows, but Elena felt cold to her bones. "What will you do?" Miguel asked finally. "I don't know," Elena whispered. "I love him, Papa, but maybe she's right. Maybe I'm not good for his future." Miguel reached over and took her hands in his weathered ones. "Mija, there's something I never told you about your mother and me. When we first fell in love, people said we came from different worlds too. She was educated, from a family of teachers. I was just a farmer's son. But she chose love over everyone else's expectations." "This is different," Elena said. "The gap between David and me, it's too big." "Maybe," Miguel said, "but that's not for his mother to decide, or for me to decide. It's between you and David." Elena nodded, but her heart felt heavy with the knowledge that love wasn't always enough to bridge the spaces between different worlds. Sometimes, the kindest thing was to step back and let someone fly toward the future they deserved, even if it meant leaving your own dreams behind. In a secret garden, where autumn flowers bloomed like promises that couldn't be kept.
Chapter 5. The Distance Between Worlds. Elena avoided the secret garden for 3 days. She threw herself into her regular work, staying late at the nursery to reorganize inventory, and spending her evenings at the community center helping children with their homework. But the absence of David felt like a constant ache, and she knew he must be wondering why she had disappeared. On Friday afternoon, her resolve cracked. She slipped through the hedge one last time, intending to leave a note explaining her decision. Instead, she found David sitting on the stone bench, his laptop open and his face drawn with exhaustion. He looked up when she appeared, relief flooding his features. "Elena, I was worried something had happened to you." "I've been thinking," she said, not moving from the garden's edge. The distance between them felt significant now, a physical representation of all the barriers she was finally acknowledging. "About us?" David closed his laptop and stood, taking a step toward her. "About your future." Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. "Your mother came to see me." David's face darkened. "What did she say?" "That I'm holding you back, that you have important decisions to make and I'm a distraction you can't afford." Elena's voice remained steady, but her hands were shaking. "She offered to pay for my education if I stopped seeing you." "She had no right," David started forward, anger flashing in his gray eyes. "She had every right," Elena interrupted. "She's your mother, and she's trying to protect your interests. Maybe she's right." David stopped, staring at her. "You think she's right?" The pain in his voice nearly broke her resolve. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, as if she could hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. "I think we've been living in a fantasy," she said softly. "This garden is beautiful, but it's not the real world. In the real world, you have board meetings and investment opportunities, and a future that someone like me can't be part of." "Someone like you? What does that mean?" "You know what it means." Elena gestured around the garden. "This place is hidden behind hedges for a reason. What we have here, it can't exist out there." David was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Is that really what you think, that I'm ashamed of you?" "I think you care about me," Elena said. "But I also think your mother is right about the timing. You're building something important with your company. You could change the world, David. Don't let me stop you from doing that." "And what about your dreams?" David asked. "What about the gardens you want to design, the beauty you want to create?" Elena smiled sadly. "Your mother's offer would give me those things. I could study anywhere I want, have the career I've always dreamed of. In exchange for giving me up? In exchange for letting you focus on your future without complications." David walked over to the climbing roses, touching one of the coral blooms with gentle fingers. "My grandmother planted these roses as a wedding gift to herself. She was engaged to a man her family chose, someone suitable from their social circle. But she was in love with my grandfather, who was just a young architect with big dreams and no money." Elena felt her heart constrict. What did she do? "She called off the engagement 3 days before the wedding. Married my grandfather instead. Her family disowned her for 2 years, but she always said it was the bravest thing she ever did. These roses were her celebration of choosing love over expectation." "And they lived happily ever after?" Elena asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of her voice. "They lived authentically," David said. "They built something real together. My grandfather designed this house, and my grandmother created these gardens. They had challenges. Money was tight for years, and some doors stayed closed to them because of their choices, but they never regretted choosing each other." Elena felt tears she had been holding back finally spill over. "It's not the same thing, David. Your grandmother's family was wealthy too. They were equals, even if her parents didn't approve at first. You and we're from completely different worlds." "Are we?" "Because from where I'm standing, we both care about creating something meaningful with our lives. We both understand what it means to dream beyond our circumstances. We both find peace in growing things and making the world a little more beautiful." "That's not enough," Elena whispered. "Maybe not," David admitted. "But shouldn't we find out together? Shouldn't we at least try before we let other people's fears make our decisions for us?" Elena looked around the secret garden one last time, memorizing the way the afternoon light painted everything golden. She thought about David's grandmother, brave enough to choose love over security. She thought about her own parents who had crossed an entire country to chase their dreams. But she also thought about David's board meeting, about the renewable energy projects that could help families like hers, about the weight of expectation and responsibility that rested on his shoulders. "I can't be the reason you don't reach your potential." David's face crumpled with understanding and grief. "And I can't be the reason you don't reach yours." They stood there in the gathering dusk, two people who had found something precious together but couldn't figure out how to hold on to it without destroying everything else they cared about. "I should go," Elena said. David nodded but didn't move toward her. "Will I see you again?" "I don't think that would be wise." "Elena!" "Take care of yourself, David. Change the world like you're meant to." She turned and walked towards the gap in the hedge, every step feeling like a small death. At the entrance, she paused and looked back. David was still standing by the roses, his shoulders curved with loss. "For what it's worth," she called softly, "these have been the most beautiful weeks of my life." Then she slipped through the hedge and walked away from the secret garden, carrying its memory like a pressed flower in her heart, something lovely and fragile that would never bloom again but would never completely fade either.
Chapter 6. Brave Choices. 6 weeks passed in gray monotony. Elena threw herself into her studies with fierce determination, using Victoria Blackwood's generous scholarship offered to enroll in a prestigious landscape architecture program in Oregon. She told herself it was what she had always wanted, the chance to turn her dreams into reality without the burden of crushing debt. But late at night, when her textbooks lay open and her apartment was quiet, she found herself sketching not the modern sustainable gardens featured in her coursework, but climbing roses and stone benches, oak trees heavy with Spanish moss, and a gray-eyed man who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen. David, meanwhile, had returned to his life with what appeared to be renewed focus. The board meeting Victoria had mentioned went better than expected, securing funding for a major expansion of his solar technology. Tech journals began featuring him in articles about young entrepreneurs changing the world. From the outside, it looked like his mother's intervention had been exactly what his career needed. But Miguel noticed things others missed. The way David's shoulders stayed tense even during routine conversations, how he no longer spent time in his grandmother's garden, instead pacing the formal lawns while conducting phone meetings. The dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights despite professional success. "He asks about her," Miguel told his wife one evening. "Not directly, but he finds ways to work Elena into conversations. How's your daughter doing in school? Is she happy with her program? I think he's suffering as much as she is." Maria Morales looked up from her sewing. "Then why don't they do something about it?" "Because they think they're protecting each other," Miguel said sadly. The breaking point came on a Thursday in December, during the company's year-end board meeting. David was presenting quarterly results when one of the investors, an older man named Harrison Webb, made an offhand comment about corporate social responsibility. "Of course, we need to be careful about appearances," Webb said. "The renewable energy market is competitive. We can't afford to have our CEO associated with any questionable choices that might reflect poorly on the company's image." David paused mid-presentation. "Questionable choices?" Webb shifted uncomfortably. "I'm simply saying that public perception matters. The right marriage, the right social connections, the right neighborhood, these things affect investor confidence." Something cold and sharp crystallized in David's chest. He looked around the boardroom table at the faces of men and women who had never had to choose between love and ambition, who had never questioned whether they deserved happiness on their own terms. "Gentlemen," David said, closing his laptop, "ladies, I appreciate your investment in this company and your confidence in my leadership, but I need to be very clear about something." The room grew quiet, sensing a shift in the meeting's direction. "My personal life," David continued, "is not a corporate asset to be managed. My relationships, my choices, my definition of what makes a life worth living, none of that is subject to board approval." Victoria, who had been taking notes in the corner, looked up sharply. "David, this isn't the time." "This is exactly the time," David interrupted, looking directly at his mother. "For weeks, I've been trying to convince myself that success means sacrificing the things that make me human, that being a good CEO means being a lesser person." He stood up, gathering his papers. "This company exists to make the world more sustainable, more livable for future generations. If we can't live sustainably ourselves, if we can't make choices that align with our values, then what's the point?" "You're talking about throwing away everything you've built," Victoria said, her voice tight with panic. "No, I'm talking about building something that actually matters." He walked toward the door, then paused. "The company will continue to thrive with or without your investment, Mr. Webb, but it will thrive authentically, with leadership that's not afraid to stand behind its convictions." David left the boardroom and drove straight to the airport, booking the first flight to Oregon. He had no idea if Elena would see him, if she would even give him a chance to explain how wrong they had both been about what sacrifice really meant. But as the plane lifted off from San Francisco, David felt something he hadn't experienced since those autumn afternoons in the secret garden. The lightness of choosing love over fear, authenticity over appearance, hope over the safe but suffocating expectations of others. He was finally ready to be as brave as his grandmother had been, as brave as Elena is every day just by dreaming beyond her circumstances. Now he just had to hope it wasn't too late. Chapter 7. Fragments and Hope. Elena's apartment in Portland was small, but filled with light. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a community garden where neighbors grew vegetables and children played among the raised beds. She had chosen the place partly for the view. It reminded her, in small ways, of the secret garden where her life had briefly blazed with possibility. Her studies consumed most of her waking hours. The landscape architecture program was rigorous, challenging her to think about design not just as beauty, but as social justice, environmental restoration, and community healing. She excelled in her coursework, professors praising her intuitive understanding of how people interacted with natural spaces. But success felt hollow without someone to share it with. She had heard about David's confrontation with the board through her father, who still maintained the Blackwood grounds. McGill reported that David had seemed different since that December day, more determined, less burdened, but also somehow lonelier. "He's turning the old garden into something public," McGill told her during one of their weekly phone calls. "Working with city planners to create a community space. Says he wants it to be a place where families from all backgrounds can find beauty." Elena's heart had clenched with recognition. It sounded like the kind of project she would have designed herself, the marriage of David's resources and her dreams. But she was in Oregon now, building her own future, and he was in California, doing the same. The knock on her door came on a Sunday evening in March, when spring rain was pattering against her windows, and she was grading papers from the continuing education course she taught on weekends. Elena opened the door expecting a neighbor or a delivery, but instead found David standing in the hallway, soaked from the rain and holding a manila envelope. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked thinner than she remembered, his dark hair longer and slightly unkempt. But his gray eyes held a clarity that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from within. "Hello, Elena," he said softly. "David?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I have a proposition for you, a professional one." Elena's heart sank slightly. After all these months, after flying across the country to see her, he was here to talk business. She stepped aside to let him in, trying to ignore how her small apartment seemed to shrink with his presence. "Coffee?" she offered. "Please." They moved through the motions of hospitality, Elena making coffee, David accepting a towel for his wet hair, and both of them carefully polite as if they were strangers, rather than two people who had shared their deepest dreams in a secret garden. Finally, they sat at her small kitchen table, the manila envelope between them like a bridge or a barrier. "Open it," David said. Elena's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the flap. Inside were architectural drawings, site plans, and photographs of a familiar space transformed. The secret garden had been opened to the surrounding neighborhood, connected by winding paths to a series of smaller themed gardens, a children's playground surrounded by fruit trees, raised beds for community vegetables, a meditation space with benches arranged around a small pond. "It's beautiful," Elena breathed, studying the detailed plans, "but I don't understand why you're showing me this." "Because I need a landscape architect, someone who understands that design isn't just about aesthetics. It's about creating spaces where people can grow and dream and feel connected to something larger than themselves." Elena looked up from the drawings to meet his eyes. "David," he continued, "the board voted to support the project, full funding for a community garden and education center. We'll offer workshops on sustainable living, classes for kids about environmental science, space for local artists to display their work. But I need someone to design it who really understands what it means to dream beyond your circumstances." Elena said quietly, "You could hire any landscape architect in California, farms with more experience, better credentials." "I could," David agreed, "but I want to hire you."
The words hung in the air between them, loaded with everything they weren't saying. Elena set the drawings aside and looked directly at him. "Is this really about the job?" she asked. David was quiet for a long moment, rain drumming against the windows. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "I've spent these months trying to convince myself that we made the right choice, that walking away from each other was the mature, responsible thing to do. I focused on the company, expanded our market reach, made all the right moves to build my career." "And?" Elena prompted when he paused. "And none of it mattered without someone to share it with. None of the success felt real because the person who understood what it actually meant to me was 3 states away, building her own dreams alone." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "David, we talked about this. The differences between us are smaller than I thought and bigger than I imagined. Smaller because when we're together, none of that other stuff matters. We see each other clearly, support each other's dreams, make each other better. But bigger because I finally understand that it's not about where we come from, it's about where we're willing to go together." He reached across the table and took Elena's hands in his. "I don't want you to give up your dreams for me, Elena. I want to help you achieve them. This project, it's everything you talked about in the garden. Accessible beauty, community building, environmental education. It's your vision with the resources to make it reality." "And what about us?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. "I'm hoping," David said, "that working together on something we both care about might give us a chance to figure out what us looks like in the real world. Not hidden in a secret garden, but out in the open where it can grow into something lasting." Elena stared at their joined hands, his pale and soft from office work, hers darker and calloused from soil and plants. The differences were still there, written in their very skin, but underneath she could feel the steady rhythm of his pulse matching her own. "I'm scared," Elena admitted. "So am I, but I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have built together." Elena looked out at the community garden beyond her window, where early spring vegetables were just beginning to push through the soil. Growth always required risk. Seeds buried in darkness, trusting that light and water and time would transform them into something beautiful. "When would you need an answer?" she asked. David's smile was soft and patient. "Take all the time you need. I'll be in Portland for the week, meeting with some environmental groups about sustainable development. But Elena," he squeezed her hands gently, "whatever you decide about the job, I needed you to know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake I've ever made." After he left, Elena sat at her table for hours, studying the garden plans and thinking about the girl who had first slipped through a gap in a hedge, looking for beauty beyond her reach. That girl had been afraid to dream too big, afraid to believe she deserved more than the small life that circumstances had carved out for her. But the woman she had become understood something that girl didn't understand. Sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't reaching for more than you deserved, but settling for less than you were capable of becoming.
Chapter 8. The Journey Home. 3 months later, Elena stood at the edge of what had once been a secret garden, watching contractors install the final bench in what would soon be the Blackwood Community Garden and Environmental Center. The space had been transformed, but not tamed. The wild roses still climbed toward the sky. The ancient oaks still provided shade and shelter, but now they welcomed visitors instead of hiding from them. Her design had preserved the garden's essential magic while making it accessible to everyone. Winding paths connected different themed areas: the children's discovery zone, where kids could plant seeds and watch them grow; the meditation space, where adults could find quiet moments in busy lives; the workshop pavilion, where community classes would be held on everything from composting to renewable energy. The original stone bench remained at the heart of it all, but Elena had designed a series of smaller seating areas throughout the space, creating intimate conversation spots while maintaining the garden's sense of peaceful expansiveness. "The pond looks perfect there," David said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee from the food truck that had become a regular fixture during construction. Elena accepted the cup gratefully. "Your grandmother would have loved the reflection garden. The way the water mirrors the sky, it makes the space feel twice as big." "She would have loved that you kept her climbing roses, and that kids will be able to pick apples from the trees she planted 50 years ago." They stood in comfortable silence, watching workers put the final touches on the entrance archway where a sign would soon read, "In memory of Margaret Blackwood, who believed gardens should be places where dreams take root." The past 3 months had been intense. Elena had moved back to California to oversee the project, working 16-hour days to coordinate contractors, select plants, and design educational programming. She and David had worked together daily, their professional collaboration slowly rebuilding the personal connection they had walked away from the year before. But they had been careful this time. No rushing, no secret meetings, no hiding from the complexities of their situation. Instead, they had built something in the open, a partnership based on shared values, mutual respect, and the kind of deep friendship that could support whatever else might grow between them. "The opening ceremony is next week. Are you nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted. "What if people don't come? What if the design doesn't work the way I imagined? What if the whole thing is just an expensive mistake?" David set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "Elena, look around. Really look." She followed his gesture, seeing the space through his eyes. Even unfinished, the garden was already attracting visitors. Neighbors peered through the construction fencing. Children pressed their faces against the mesh to see the playground taking shape. Elderly couples pointed excitedly at the herb garden, where they would soon be able to participate in cooking classes. "This place is going to change lives," David said quietly. "It's already changing lives. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street has been asking when she can start teaching her traditional recipe classes in the workshop pavilion. The local high school wants to use the environmental learning lab for their science curriculum. You've created something that will matter to this community for generations." I felt the familiar flutter of hope in my chest, stronger now and more confident than it had been in those early days of secret dreams. "We created it," I corrected. "I never could have done this alone." "Neither could I. That's what partnerships are for." The word hung between them, layered with meaning. They were partners in this project, certainly. But over the past months, Elena had begun to hope they might become partners in something larger. As if reading her thoughts, David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said. Elena's heart skipped. "David, if this is what I think it is..." "It's not a ring," he said quickly, then smiled. "I mean, it might become part of that conversation someday if you want it to, but right now it's something else." Elena wrapped the package carefully. Inside was a small leather journal, its cover worn soft with age. She opened it to find page after page of pressed flowers, each one labeled in the same spidery handwriting they had seen in the gardening books months before. "My grandmother's flower journal. She pressed something from the garden every season for 40 years. I thought you might like to continue the tradition." Elena traced the outline of a pressed rose, its coral color faded but still beautiful. "David, this is too precious. It should stay in your family." "You are my family," he said simply. not in the traditional way, but in every way that matters. You understand what this place means, what growing things means, what it means to create beauty that outlasts us. Elena looked up from the journal to find David watching her with eyes full of love and patience and hope. The same look he had worn that first day when he found her drawing in his secret garden, except now there was nothing secret about it. They stood in the open, surrounded by the beautiful thing they had built together, with nothing to hide from and everything to look forward to. The opening ceremony is next Saturday. Will you be there? I'll be wherever you are, if you'll have me. Elena smiled, thinking about the girl who had once been afraid to dream beyond her circumstances, and the woman she had become who understood that the best dreams were the ones you shared with someone who believed in them as much as you did. I'll have you, she said. As the sun set over the community garden, painting the sky in shades of coral and champagne, like David's grandmother's climbing roses, Elena and David sat on the original stone bench and watched their shared dream prepare to bloom into reality. The secret garden had become something larger than either of them had imagined, not just a place of beauty, but a symbol of what could grow when people were brave enough to reach across the spaces between different worlds and plant something together in the rich soil of hope. Whether they would build a life together remained an open question, a story still being written in the careful tending of shared dreams. But as Elena pressed her first flower from their garden between the pages of Margaret Blackwood's journal, a white gardenia, symbol of secret love made manifest, she knew that some questions were worth living into, one season at a time. The garden would be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and for years to come. And wherever the future led them, Elena and David would always have this place where their hearts had learned to grow toward the light together.